So thanks so much for coming along this morning. I'm Selena Maguire, Consumer Director at Gorkana, and well done on getting a place at this morning's breakfast. We had more than 1,000 people who wanted to come along this morning, and that was to hear from this man, who is Luke Lewis, editor of BuzzFeed UK. And it's actually Luke that we have to thank for the phenomena in the UK. He's a former editor of NME.com, but he approached BuzzFeed in the States in 2012, I think it was. So with a mocked up version of what a UK BuzzFeed could look like, because he's a massive fan. He wrote out theoretical headlines based on British culture, and the rest is history. He actually pitched that to Jonah Peretti. There are now 16 million monthly users in the UK, which represents about 10% of the global audience for BuzzFeed. So, Luke, thanks so much for your time this morning, for coming along today. You're a very popular man. So BuzzFeed launched in the UK, it was sort of roughly March 25 last year, so coming up for a year. Yeah. So tell us about your first year. What's it been like?
Well, the first week, first day, it was like, couldn't have gone better, and it was kind of a bit sort of freakish. And so like everything we published on the first day, I think all those articles went viral, and I was like, this is kind of seems too easy. And but it was great. Like the feedback was just really, really good instantly. We got some really good press, which helped. And so it was really encouraging because initially it was quite a low key. It was really an experiment. So BuzzFeed they didn't throw tons of money at it. It was like 3 of us, and we were sharing an office with other companies and stuff. So, and I think it was kind of they were committed to it for a year. It was like a year's experiment. But fortunately, from the first day, you could sense that the audience was there. And and the first 2 months were brilliant. And we started to get a sense of like what would go viral in the UK, which was actually quite often different to the things that were going super viral in the US. So that was really good. First 2 months were brilliant. Then it kind of plateaued a bit. We got to about 5 million users, and it kind of plateaued. But then we just started hiring more people. So as we had more people producing more content, it's really grown since then. And so the audience has really taken off since about October last year.
Have you been surprised how quickly UK audiences have taken to it?
I think I was pretty confident of that initial, getting to that sort of initial 5 million type audience. I thought that was, because I was a big fan of what they've been doing in the US, and I thought all we'd have to do was kind of take that and tweak it a little bit for a British audience, and I think people would really like it. But I wasn't sure that it would then grow beyond that, to a sort of a bigger audience. But yeah, it certainly seems to be going in the right direction.
It does. So what do you think is the secret to why it has been so successful in the UK? What would you say it is?
Well, it's initially, for the first year, we've basically been focusing on like the fun side of BuzzFeed, like entertaining lists, stuff that is just uplifting and humorous and shareable. So I think, and if you look at the articles that perform best in the UK, they've all been funny. And there's a bit of a point of difference between UK and US. So some of a classic top performing BuzzFeed post in the US will be something like 21 photos that will restore your faith in humanity. It's just uplifting and makes you feel good. And we tried doing stuff like that in the UK, but it didn't really work that well. And I think British people, they're kind of a bit like resistant to having their sort of emotional buttons pushed that way. But we realised that if you could be just funny, that was like the only way to go viral in the UK is really to be funny. So that's worked really well. Also, like regional identity has been really powerful. So there was an article we did like quite early on that was a real light bulb moment because people absolutely loved it, and it was things Northerners miss when they move to London. And it's just that people love to share those things because, especially on Facebook, which is where 70% of our traffic comes from. It's like your friends are on Facebook and your family are on Facebook. So it's really, regional identity becomes quite key. And if you put that on Facebook, you're going to get loads of great comments underneath, loads of likes. So regional identity, also like weirdly poking fun at class things. So one of our most popular things we ever did was like middle class problems, which we've done a few times. And so we've realised that British people just like to zero in on little sections of society and then sort of poke fun at them a bit. So that's been quite a winning formula for us.
And we talked earlier, you said it's your technology platform as well is just quite incredible.
Yeah, I think the reason we've been successful, I reckon, is a lot to do with the technology and kind of the science of publishing. And so when people join BuzzFeed, journalists, they're always really excited about the content management system because it's really good. Basically, it's fast, and there is a team of people who are employed full time to just make it better. So every day, you'll get an email saying, "Hey, this thing that wasn't working, now you can do this." And there is, like, if there's something you can't do within kind of content management system, you're encouraged to kind of let people know, and then they make it happen. And that is really good because a lot of journalists, they are sort of stymied by the technology of the places where they work, where often the content management system is like 10 years old, everyone hates it, it's broken. So there is that side of it, but also you have a lot of data at your fingertips. So when you write an article, you have the viral dashboard, so you can see how well it's done, where the traffic's come from. And so I think there is sort of a culture, like, you kind of know what's done, what's shared well the previous day, so you come in and you think, well, how can we do something a bit like that? So those things that really help.
And you also talked about experimentation, which obviously more established publishers, they don't have that sort of luxury of being able to experiment with things, but you guys have got this real culture. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's quite an important thing that there's a company culture of, like, experimentation and fun. So I think, like, the role of the editor traditionally is to sort of say no to things and keep quite a tight control over, like, tone and types of content, things like that. But at BuzzFeed, it's really more about just sort of saying yes to things and allowing people to experiment. Yeah. And so quite often an idea that might sound completely ludicrous will end up doing really well. And I think it's really important to just let people do it. Like, for example, last month, I think one of our top posts was like a definitive ranking of all the tube lines. And that's just a really silly throwaway idea. I mean, yeah, it's kind of ludicrous. But that people really loved it. So I think you learn from that it's good to just, if people have a kind of a crazy idea, you should just let them do it. And sometimes it fails. We write plenty of things that are completely bomb.
But you don't
and
beat
you just kind of
yourself
think,
up about
okay,
that.
well, that didn't work, but we'll try another one.
And you also, I was reading, you've got quite a scientific approach to headline writing, and you do this sort of split testing sometimes of headlines. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we do a little bit. So within the CMS, you can write a whole number of different headlines and use different thumbnail photos, and then those go through to the homepage, and different readers will see different ones. And then within 2 hours, you can find out which has had most clicks, and so you choose the one that's been the most powerful. But we don't really do it that much, to be honest. The ability is there, and we're kind of a bit reluctant to do too much optimization because it just feels a little bit so robotic. And the company that's completely synonymous with, like, really ruthless headline optimization is Upworthy, and I feel a bit sorry for their writers because they have to write 25 headlines for every single article. But it does really work. An impactful headline can make a massive difference to how many clicks and then how many shares something gets. So I think it is worth thinking about, and I think I would like our writers to do it a bit more, but just like kind of a middle ground between how we do it and then Upworthy, and I think they take it maybe too far.
So what do you know about your readers in a year? What sort of feedback do you get, and who are they, where are they, all of those sorts of things?
Well, in terms of where are they, at the moment it does skew towards London more than we'd like, which is why we try and do a lot of sort of regional identity stuff to try and get readers in other parts of the country. So the majority is London, and it skews very slightly towards women rather than men, only very slightly. But then if you look at the shares tend to come far more from women, but I think that's just because women share more on the internet. And in terms of the age group, it's like 60% of our readers are between 18 and 34, which is much younger than most the readers of most newspaper sites, which are quite surprisingly old.
Do you get much reader feedback? Do you sort of interact much with readers?
Yeah, definitely. There is I mean, the famous thing about BuzzFeed is that you have the reaction buttons. So you can leave a written through comment, but if you just want to react with like LOL or OMG, you just click that button. So a lot of that goes on, and then in the UK we have some specific reaction buttons. So you can hit blimey or splendid. So a lot of that goes on, and also the great thing is that readers can write their own articles because there is the whole community side of BuzzFeed. So you can just sign up, create an account, and write whatever you want. And if they're good, occasionally we do feature them on the homepage.
Yeah. Actually, we had a lot of questions in from PRs about that because they're obviously keen to hook up brands. So anyone can do that. Anyone can start a community post.
Yeah, and it's really whether or not we feature it on the homepage. Obviously, the sort of photo sourcing and stuff that needs to be up to scratch, but we kind of help out with that. But the main thing is that it should be fun and entertaining. Like the community is supposed to be fun, and so a lot of the people in the UK who sort of cottoned onto this community aspect of BuzzFeed, it's not very fun. So we had the first person was Grant Shapps, the chairman of the Tory party, and he did this really awful sort of axe grindy piece of laying into Labour's energy policy, and we sort of saw this and were kind of slightly horrified by it, but we couldn't do anything about it. I mean, it didn't break any of the rules of the community. It's just it was like obviously political and sort of tendentious, and just not in the spirit of BuzzFeed. And since then, there's been like follow-ups. Like the Lib Dems did a really awful piece on like why one character from Doctor Who would be a Lib Dem supporter. It's just so I think we might have come to the end of that phase. Like a lot of these sort of political groups, they're like competing with each other to do a BuzzFeed. But
they're all bored now. Hey, you're
and we've had a few charities use the community feature as well, and some people are incredibly good at it. So in the US, HarperCollins as a brand, they created their own profile, and they did a whole series of posts which did incredibly well. They did one that had over 1 million views, which was like things that only book lovers will understand. So that kind of thing, it can be great. I guess the commercial guys at BuzzFeed probably wouldn't. They don't love it because, like, if HarperCollins are getting millions of views on BuzzFeed, you kind of think, well, they're not going to spend money with us. But I mean,
what should brands be and PRs be keeping in mind then when they're writing community posts that they're hoping might get onto the homepage? Are there any sort of a couple of things that they need to?
If it was like obviously branded, then we wouldn't put it on the homepage really, to be honest. But sometimes it can be pretty subtle. I remember a bit of Game of Thrones promotion, and the PR company looking after the Game of Thrones DVD release, I think I think it was a stunt, it was like a dragon's skull, which was supposedly found on a beach. And actually, it's not like the PR came to us and said, "Look at this stunt, will you feature it?" I think they just kind of put it out there, and because it was an arresting image, it ended up on Reddit, so it was kind of like going viral anyway. So we love those kind of things, so we reported on it, but it didn't say, "Hey, go and watch Game of Thrones." It was kind of more subtle than that. There was another one, I think it might have been the same company actually. It was a stunt like Christmas lights in Norwich, and they flashed out the face of Alan Partridge.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And which is just like really, really entertaining, and those kind of things are really shareable. So we cover them, and actually, that promoted the DVD release of the Alan Partridge movie. So it's kind of, maybe it's not that subtle, but I think it's just as long as they're entertaining.
Okay. So what about the other key channels on the site, the other sort of content bits? Just can you briefly talk us through what you've got?
Yeah, well, I think one of the good things about BuzzFeed is that you hire writers, and they actually don't have like a beat. They don't have a content category that they have to be kind of restricted to. So there is a genre of article on BuzzFeed that we just call like Buzz Team. So if you're part of Buzz Team, then your job is just come in the morning and just come up with like funny ideas and come up with things that you think will be shareable. And so there is that side of it, but then we also have an entertainment editor, and he mostly is just in charge of thinking about TV, like British TV in particular. So yeah, I think PRs should definitely know about him. He's quite new. He's called Scott Bryan, and yeah, he should be on all your mailing lists because he's in charge of writing about TV. And we also have a celebrity editor, Kimberly Dance, and a celebrity reporter, Ellie Woodward, who just started this week. And so those two in particular are quite keyed into the PR industry in a way that a lot of other people on BuzzFeed aren't. A lot of the other writers, because we don't do like reviews and we don't do that many interviews, they're actually quite isolated from the PR industry, and they just kind of write stuff, whatever they want. But those two in particular, yeah, Kimberly Dance and Scott Bryan, definitely want to hear. Oh, we also have a lifestyle editor, which is quite new, so Alva Malone, and her job is to kind of think about what will share well on Pinterest. So she does a lot in terms of like food and drink, going out, a little bit on fashion and beauty. So in that sense, we've started to shade into some of the same territory as like women's magazines, which is quite a new thing for us. Okay. So she's definitely keen to hear from PRs as well.
All right. Well, there's a team of 16 now. So you started off with your 3.
Yeah.
Is that right? You've got a team of 16?
I think 16 or 17 editorial, and then there's going to be about 10 more by the end of the year.
Yes, yeah.
And there will be, I think, one more celebrity reporter, maybe another person in entertainment, but mostly it's going to be in news.
So you're looking for a political reporter as well at the moment, is that
right?
right?
Yeah, we hired a political editor at the end of last year, Jim Waterson, who used to work at City AM, and he's been absolutely brilliant. But we just need to, and that stuff has been like incredibly well received. Like writing about politics, we found can be just as viral and just as like widely read as anything else we do. Like our top post in the last few weeks was it's like 21 pictures of politicians in wellies staring at floods, and there's just something inherently amusing about pictures of politicians in wellies. So that kind of stuff mixed in with slightly more serious like political reporting has worked really well. So we want to build up that side of it. So we need to hire more people.
On a typical day, how much new content are you posting on the site?
It's not a huge amount. It's in the UK, it's about 25 to 30 posts, which is a lot less than some of our rival publishers. I mean, if you work for Mail Online, for example, I know that you tend to be tasked with writing like at least 8 posts a day. I think at BuzzFeed it's generally more like 1 or 2. And but that's globally. I think we're up to about 200 or 300 posts a day.
What does a typical day look like? You said that you come in the morning. You've got that. You sort of have 10 minutes where you all stand up and share your ideas. Yeah.
We try and keep the meetings really, really short. So we have a stand-up meeting every morning that's never longer than 10 minutes, and you just kind of go around the room and just say what you're working on. And there is a kind of an unofficial company policy that no meeting is ever compulsory. So if you don't want to go, you don't have to go. And they very rarely last an hour. I think that's one of the things that makes people hate their jobs, really, is like long, boring meetings. So we try not to have them, really.
So this is when people come up with the ideas for the listicles and the quizzes?
Yeah, well, usually by that point, you hope that they've already come up with the ideas, and we have those meetings just to kind of, people say what they're working on. Then once a week, we have a bit of a longer brainstorm. And those are really useful, but quite often it's amazing how many of the like best performing ideas we have we come up with them in the pub, and that is really nice.
That's not a surprise.
Or just always just having a conversation, and at the end of the conversation, someone's, we should do that as a list, and some of the best stuff comes out. That's really good.
Which day is that meeting? The longer meeting that you have?
Usually on Friday.
Friday.
Yeah.
Okay. So if people are feeding into your entertainment guys and the guys that are pitched to by PRs, when is best for them to be feeding in? Is it sort of afternoons, and should they just be emailing, or should
just
they be
whenever,
phoning?
I think, really. Yeah. I think a lot of it is just being on mailing lists, because we're quite new. We just haven't built that side of things up. So I mean that's really useful.
I mean, what should PRs think sort of been keeping in mind when they are approaching and making pitches? Is there anything in particular?
I just think bearing in mind that we don't do reviews or listings, and we only very occasionally do interviews. We're kind of interested in pitches for interviews, but we don't do a huge amount of them. But we do love writing about things that are just really fun and entertaining and humorous. So I think that Alan Partridge thing is a great example. They're kind of a stunt that is, potentially the kind of thing that would get on Reddit and do thousands of views, you know, that kind of world. We obviously were interested in that. But there is a whole world of PR now that is like deliberately trying to create like viral videos, and often they're quite bad. So I mean, that's not very useful advice, though, is it? I mean, make something good.
Yeah. But if people do, you said you're doing slightly more interviews, but what do you only know when you'll pitch something, whether it's going to make an interview, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a bit of a
kind
tricky
of
one at the
nebulous.
moment, because we're trying to work it out, because what I really want BuzzFeed to be is like distinctive and not cover the same ground and look the same as every other site. So often we do get offered things. So I think we've got an interview with Kylie Minogue coming up, but it's like it's a junket, so it's just going to be a video interview. We're going to be probably asking the same questions as everyone else, going to look the same as everyone else's interview. So it's kind of, you could think, what's the point? But so we want them to look distinctive. And there was one I thought that really worked. We were often interviewed with Nick Hewer from The Apprentice, and he came in and we set him this test, like how well does Nick Hewer know the internet? So we showed him things like Grumpy Cat and twerking, and then we sort of filmed his reactions. So we made vines out of his reactions. So we ended up with these sort of reaction gifs of a sort of old confused man trying to work out what Grumpy Cat is. And I really liked that, because it was just not the kind of interview you would have on any other site. So if people wanted to pitch us interviews, it would be great if you also had an idea of how it would maybe be just not a straight Q&A about.
What was behind that, though? What was he promoting? Was that just for his profile, or was that something to do with The Apprentice?
It was something he was doing. I can't remember what. I think it's something with Cadbury's, maybe. It was. He'd done some.
But ultimately, it was.
He'd done some really bad viral video, which he wanted to promote. So we said, well, your video's quite bad, but if you come into the office, we can do something fun.
Okay. Competitors. Do you think you have any?
I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of people's attention spans, you know, so we really want. What Gianni Presti often talks about is like this bored at work network, or like the bored in line network. So that's often that moment when you're just really looking to be entertained. And so you think, oh, go to BuzzFeed. So I think obviously most people, when they're at work in their lunch hour, I think their first port of call for the majority of people is probably mail online. So I think that's an obvious competitor. I think it'd be great if in that moment where you've got millions of people all around the country in their lunch hour, if they're also looking at BuzzFeed or instead of, I think that's probably a pretty close one. I think that's probably the main one.
What about, you would have seen that there's a lot of media organisations that are trying to sort of emulate what you're doing. I mean, how do you feel about that kind of copying, really? Trying to...
Yeah, often people will tweet at us. So it happens all the time, like, oh, the BuzzFeed are just trying to be, BBC are just trying to be like BuzzFeed now, or The Guardian are trying to be like BuzzFeed, and they'll have done something in a list. And I kind of think that's a bit unfair, because lists definitely existed before BuzzFeed, you know. You know, like the 10 Commandments, that was quite an early one.
It's quite a good list, yeah.
And like magazines, I mean, big lists have been a staple of magazine publishing forever. You know, like Men's Health is always like a massive 50 on the cover, and like Cosmopolitan, there was a big number. So I think that's a bit unfair. But then you do get the kind of things that are really obviously copying BuzzFeed, like the more kind of identity posts, like things you'll only understand if, or so we've seen a fair bit of that, and it's absolutely fine. It's just, I think often other publishers, they've like might have been told by their boss like to try and do a BuzzFeed type post, and they kind of obviously resent it a bit, and they do it really quickly. It's just something they do like in their lunch hour as an experiment, and it really shows. So I think you really respect people who kind of emulate BuzzFeed, but like really do it well. Just by like doing a quick list, like in an hour. It's what I discovered when I started working here is that those things are really time consuming, and you need to really, really work at them to get like the shape of them right, and they require a bit of love.
We were talking earlier, actually, you haven't done a 23 signs, you work in PR. list.
No, that would be really good. That would be great. We've done a little bit on like PR fails, I'm afraid.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
and,
I think we've all seen them, yeah.
oh, what's the one recently? Oh, the Brits MasterCard hashtag thing. That was. People do seem to like laughing at PR fails, but whenever we have written about our PR fails, it's done really well. And I think because the PR industry is just so massive, I think it'd be great to write articles that would be read and shared by people in the PR industry. So. But our problem is that no one in the office really has worked in PR, so we can't write them ourselves. But
so you're looking for someone to write it?
Yeah, no, definitely. If someone wanted to pitch,
there is a challenge.
Yeah, because
definitely.
I think it's a huge industry, and there are so many like amusing things about it. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, we found that people actually really love to read about brands. Funnily enough, the most popular article we've ever done in the UK was a Twitter conversation between loads of different brands. I think it was started off by maybe Cadbury's or something, and then like PG Tips started responding, and then
When was this? This was not so long
end of
ago.
last year.
End of
It was
last year.
absolutely hugely popular. I thought it was like
This
a
was the
little bit
biggest
cheesy,
story that you've ever run. This is the biggest.
Yeah, and often we'll do things about like Sainsbury's on Twitter. The person running their Twitter just started firing out loads of like fish puns, and that was really popular. We often just write about things like what it's like to shop at M&S, what it's like to shop at Waitrose. I just think it's good to write about brands because they're a part of people's lives and they're real talking points.
So if someone has a fairly strong idea of how it might look, should they come directly to you with that? For the PR industry, I mean.
Yeah. Definitely.
You're going to be inundated now. Sifting through.
But I think as long as it's funny. So if someone had an idea for a list about the PR industry that was just really funny and personal, and people could really identify with. So what we'd want the ideal thing is if you can write a list that everyone who works in PR just goes, they so get me. They would obviously want to share that. So yeah.
What is quite interesting about BuzzFeed is that you do hone in on sort of, sections of the world, of the UK, but it works.
Yeah, I think in that sense it's really interesting because it sort of turns the journalistic approach on its head. Like there's a traditional way of doing journalism that I kind of grew up with, where like you're thinking of like what's going to be the most universal. So I know years ago I worked on Q magazine, so you'd be thinking, well, who are the biggest bands? Like we should write about Oasis or U2 because they have the most fans. And newspaper editors will often think about what can we put on the cover that will just resonate with millions of people. And at BuzzFeed, it's often really not like that. It's kind of the opposite. You're looking at things that aren't universal, that things are so niche. So you might write something like things you'll only understand if you grew up on a Scottish island, And so anyone who didn't grow up on a Scottish island is just not going to read it. But the small amount of people that do, if they all read it and share it, then that's a really popular article. So it's a completely different way of looking at publishing, I think.
I mean, you are really breaking a lot of the traditional rules of publishing with what you're doing, all the experimentation, having fun, or going for the niche.
Yeah, I think the fun aspect of it is really key, and I think journalists do quite enjoy reading BuzzFeed because they can see that we've written something that's just kind of ludicrous but fun, and they think, well, I never would be allowed to do that. So I think they're quite attracted to it for that reason.
Now, we haven't talked about the haters and the criticism out there. And naturally, there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily like what you're doing.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I'm not wild about it, but yeah, we get a fair bit of criticism, often from kind of old school journalists, I guess. And well, so you mentioned the word haters.
You've got this.
It's kind of a bit of an in joke, really. We don't take it that seriously, but on all our job ads, it says no haters, And I think the reason for that is like this general feeling that there was an earlier era of the internet, sort of characterized by sites like Gorka and Perez Hilton, that was like all about snark, and blogging culture was often driven by snark. And a lot of and even nowadays, I think a lot of celebrity journalism, it can be quite mean, and so because we're not really part of that world, we're not like focused on SEO or anything. We're more like trying to create things that are shareable, and the emotions that sort of trigger social sharing, they're mostly sort of nice ones, you know. Snark, people don't share stuff because of snark. They might be intrigued by it and read it, but they don't then share it. So we tend, it's especially true of our celebrity coverage. We're not really nasty about celebrities. Tend to be pretty positive. So yeah, we've kind of had this like no haters thing, but it's only true up to a certain point, because when you're hiring like foreign reporters all around the world, and you're becoming more of like a news destination, it's like, or in fact in the US we've now hired a team of like investigative reporters, and they're pretty resistant to the idea of no haters, because their job is to actually like expose wrongdoing and maybe get people sacked, and you know, like and be whistleblowers, that kind of thing. So no haters, it's a bit more of like it's a kind of an in joke, and it's there are maybe some haters.
But it strikes me when I was reading a few things. I mean, and a few people have actually, a few high-profile people in sort of more traditional media outlets have kind of admitted that maybe they're a little bit jealous of BuzzFeed and its success and its formula and that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe they just hate it. I mean, that's allowed too. Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly it's not for everyone. I think a lot of people it's the content mix that they're uncomfortable with. So if you look at the BuzzFeed homepage, you can have, if you looked at it right now, I'm sure you'd find something on the protest in Kiev, followed immediately by something about sloths, you know. But I just don't think there's anything unusual in that, because if you go out and buy a newspaper right now, you'll have probably political reporting on the cover or foreign news on the cover, but then there's also the cartoon at the back, and then there's the sport, and there's some celebrity interviews. So I don't think it's that unusual.
So what's next in the UK? What else is
in the UK?
store?
The next thing, we kind of want to do more of what we're already doing. So often people kind of like the idea that that BuzzFeed started out doing like fun lists of cats, and now we're doing serious news, and we've got people in war zones. I mean, that is true, but it's like we don't want to stop doing the fun stuff. So we're going to hire more news reporters and another couple of political reporters. But we're also hiring staff writers whose job is just going to be to write funny and entertaining stuff. So just kind of keep doing more of what we're doing, really. But I'd say news is probably is the main area of focus for us, because we're really quite new in the UK at news. We've only hired our first news reporter at the end of last year, and now we've hired a news editor who's come to us from Metro.
Yes.
So all that stuff is quite new. So that is definitely, I'd say that's our main focus for the rest of the year.
And we were talking earlier about finding the right people that fit, the right journalists that fit, and you sort of give them tests by the sounds of it. Ask them to come up with lots of ideas.
Yeah, it can be. It's getting a bit easier now because people know BuzzFeed a bit better. But it can be tricky because you're not necessarily looking for writers, people who only write. There's kind of other skills, and there is not really a word for those skills yet. So often it's kind of a personality thing, but also just we're looking for people who are just like absolutely immersed in the internet. You know, the kind of person who just wakes up, by the time they come into work, they've already trawled through Reddit and Tumblr and Twitter. And also look for people who can be funny and also have a visual sense. So if they have an idea for an article, they're not just thinking about the words, they're also thinking about how they can use Photoshop, how they can use animated GIFs, how they can visualize that idea. And so that is quite key, and it's quite difficult to find those people.